You're only good for cooking and cleaning, nothing else. You're useless." Braden snapped across the dinner table, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. That's what my stepson said to me on his 32nd birthday, in my house, over a meal I had spent 6 hours preparing, and no one, not even my husband, said a word in my defense. You see, I've been called many things in my life. A quiet woman, a good cook, a second wife, but never useless, not until that night. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I married Martin 8 years ago. He was a widower. I was divorced, alone, and tired of carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. When Martin and I found each other, I thought we were getting a second chance, 2 grown adults, both a little bruised, coming together to build something peaceful. And for a while, it was. Until Braden came back. Martin's only son, his pride and joy. The boy could do no wrong, even when he moved back home at 29, unemployed and broke. Martin said he just needed a few months to recalibrate. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I've watched him take over our home like a storm that never passed. He commandeered the living room, left dishes piled in the sink, and treated me like I was the help, and I endured it, quietly. Not because I was weak, but because I thought keeping the peace was the kind thing to do. But kindness, I've learned, often gets mistaken for permission. It started small. Braden asked to use my name to co-sign a phone plan. "Just a few months," he said. Then came the car lease, then the credit card. "Martin never said no," he said. "He's family, Evelyn." And so, little by little, I gave. My name, my credit, my peace. Until I had nothing left to give but silence. And on that night, his birthday, I decided to make that silence count. That night, I made his favorite dinner. Pan-seared chicken, roasted vegetables, and a cream sauce he used to praise when he was younger. Somewhere between juggling the stove and the oven, the red pepper flakes slipped heavier than usual. Just a little too much heat. It was a mistake, a human one. Braden took one bite, slammed his fork down, and his face twisted with rage. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "Are you trying to poison me?" "I'm sorry," I said immediately. "It came out spicier than I meant." You always screw things up," he cut in. "You can't even cook right, and that's literally the only thing you're good for." That's when he said it. The word useless. Loud, deliberate, like he wanted it to echo. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from the spice, but from humiliation. Everyone froze. Martin sat at the head of the table, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on his plate like it might rescue him. Before I could even stand, Braden grabbed the dessert plate still warm from the kitchen and hurled it at me. The impact knocked the breath out of my lungs. The heat burned through my blouse and into my skin. I gasped, stumbling back as chocolate and ceramic shattered across the floor. The pain came fast, sharp, and humiliating. I stood there, shaking, my arm burning, my heart breaking in a way no physical pain ever could. I waited for Martin to stand up. I waited for him to shout. I waited for him to protect his wife. He didn't. "Braden, calm down," he muttered weakly, like this was a disagreement over sports instead of violence at our dinner table. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not numb, not broken, just done. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for respect from a man who had already decided I didn't deserve it. I calmly set my injured arm against my side, walked to the kitchen sink, and ran cold water over the burn. The sting was unbearable, but the ache in my chest hurt more. When I returned to the dining room, no one met my eyes. I said softly, "I'll be right back." In the hallway, I opened the desk drawer where I had kept my sanity folded neatly into documents. I had prepared for this, though I hadn't known exactly how it would unfold. Copies of phone plans, insurance papers, lease agreements, credit statements. Every way Braden had leaned on my name while calling me worthless. I slipped them into the envelope and returned to the table. Braden was still breathing hard, anger buzzing off him like static. I placed the envelope beside his plate. "What's this?" he scoffed. "Your birthday gift," I said. He laughed until he opened it. Then the color drained from his face. The phone plan terminated. The car lease canceled. My name removed from every safety net he had been standing on while calling me nothing. "You can't do this," he said, panic bleeding into his voice. "I already did." He turned to Martin. "Dad?" Martin looked at me then. Really looked. Like he was just realizing the cost of his silence. "Evelyn," he began. I held up my hand, not to stop him, to steady myself. "You didn't protect me," I said quietly. "So I protected myself," Braden shouted. Martin said nothing. And for the first time, I didn't wait for permission to leave the table. I walked away, my arm burning, my heart raw, but my spine finally intact. This is where my story truly begins, not with the insult, not with the pain, but with the moment I stopped accepting abuse disguised as family. And once I stopped being silent, everything they built on my silence began to fall apart. If you felt her pain and strength, tap like and comment where you're watching from. You might find someone nearby watching with you. I didn't sleep that night. The burn on my arm throbbed steadily, but it wasn't the physical pain that kept me awake, it was the silence that followed it. A silence thicker than shame, more cutting than any insult Braden had ever spat at me. I lay in bed, my back to Martin, staring at the shadows on the wall as they shifted with the headlights of passing cars. He didn't say a word. Not that night. Not as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, gently dabbing ointment over the reddening skin. Not as I folded the towel stained with chocolate and blood, and not as I slid into bed, still wearing the robe I'd changed into after peeling the ruined blouse off my back. In 8 years of marriage, I had weathered Martin's silences. But this one echoed. By morning, the house had resumed its unnatural rhythm. The scent of coffee brewed by habit drifted through the hall. Martin sat at the kitchen table, reading the local newspaper like we hadn't lived through a small war in our dining room the night before. I stood in the doorway for a long minute, waiting, hoping. Finally, he looked up. "Your arm okay?" he asked. That was all. I nodded. "It'll heal." He glanced back at the paper. "Braden didn't mean to hurt you." I could have screamed. I could have picked up the nearest plate and shattered it into the floor the way his son shattered boundaries. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped to the counter, poured myself a cup of coffee, and said, "I'm going out today." He looked up again, surprised. "Where?" "Just some errands," I replied, already turning away. "Don't wait on me for dinner." I went to the linen closet, pulled out my old purse, the sturdy black leather one I hadn't used since we retired the joint account, and walked out the door. I didn't have a destination at first. I just drove. Past the grocery store, past the church where we got married, past the diner where Martin used to bring me pie on Sundays. Each place held a version of our life I no longer recognized. Finally, I pulled into the parking lot of the strip mall near the edge of town. There was a nail salon, a pawn shop, a small law office, and a coffee shop I hadn't visited in years. I walked inside, letting the warmth hit me like a soft blanket. The smell of fresh espresso, vanilla syrup, and toasted bagels wrapped around me like a memory. The place hadn't changed. Same mismatched chairs, same chipped mugs, same barista with purple hair and an easy smile. I ordered tea. I didn't want coffee. Not that day. And I sat, alone, by the window. 15 minutes later, a familiar voice said, "Well, I'll be damned. Evelyn?" I looked up. Lou Davis, from my old accounting firm. We'd worked together for almost 12 years, long before I met Martin. He had a voice like gravel and a laugh that could shake the walls. He looked older now, his beard whiter, his back a bit more hunched, but his eyes still sparkled with mischief. "Lou," I breathed, surprised by how quickly the smile returned to my face. He sat down without asking, waving to the barista for a refill. "I haven't seen you in 5-6 years? You look tired." I laughed, despite myself. "You always were blunt." "I'm old," he shrugged. "Bluntness is a right." We made small talk for a few minutes about the weather, mutual acquaintances, retirement, but he was studying me, and I knew it. Finally, he said, "You want to tell me why your sleeves rolled down like you're hiding a burn?" I froze. He leaned back. "I was a father to a teenage girl once, learned how to spot shame from across a room." I hesitated. Then, slowly, I pushed up the sleeve. He winced. "Jesus, Evelyn." Again. "It's nothing," I said quietly. "It's not nothing if someone did it to you." "It wasn't Martin," I said quickly. "It was his son." Lou exhaled through his nose. "Ah." And then I told him, not everything, not yet, but enough. About the years of being walked over, the debts in my name, the insults, the plate. When I finished, he sat quietly for a long moment. Then he said, "You know what your problem is?" I raised an eyebrow. "You confuse endurance with love. You think putting up with garbage makes you noble, but it just makes you tired and broke." That hit harder than I expected. "You've got options," he said, softer now. "People think starting over at our age is impossible, but hell, sometimes it's the only time we really start living." I left that coffee shop with more than a burn. I left with a voice whispering in my ear that I didn't have to stay broken just because someone else was comfortable with me being that way. That afternoon, I pulled out every financial document I had: bank statements, loan papers, insurance policies. I organized them, highlighted them, and created a file. For once, the numbers made sense. They told a story, a silent one. But this time, I was going to make it speak. When I was younger, I believed that if you worked hard, were kind, and stayed out of trouble, the world would protect you. That goodness, in and of itself, created safety. But by the time I reached 58, I'd learned a quieter, harsher truth sometimes. Being good just made you a target. That night, after my talk with Lou, I stayed up in the den with the overhead light dimmed and a stack of documents in front of me. I hadn't done this kind of work in years, not since I left my part-time accounting job after marrying Martin. But the habits came back quickly. The sorting, the calculations, the highlighting. I saw it all clearly now. Over the course of 3 years, Braden had built an entire scaffolding of financial dependency under my name. Phone plans, car insurance, medical bills, credit cards, some I didn't even remember signing for. He hadn't stolen from me in the traditional sense. No, he just let me give, again and again, until the giving bled me dry. And I let him. At first it was small, just sign here, it's temporary, you're good with money, you'll understand. He had a way of saying thank you without meaning it, of smiling just enough to make you question your instincts. But he didn't know I'd kept records. I always had. Spreadsheets, PDFs, printed statements in the filing cabinet. I hadn't looked at them as a weapon before, but that was exactly what they had become. The truth cold, undeniable, and documented. At 1 a.m., I locked the file drawer, turned off the light, and stood for a moment in the middle of the den. The moonlight touched the couch where Braden had fallen asleep so many times, feet up, shoes on. I thought of all the nights I'd tiptoed around his mess, all the mornings I'd made him coffee he never thanked me for. And then I made a decision. Not rage, not revenge, just resolve. I would dismantle everything he had built on my back. The next morning, I dressed neatly, navy cardigan, pressed jeans, the small gold earrings I wore when I wanted to be taken seriously. Martin was already in the kitchen, stirring eggs. He looked up, startled to see me fully dressed before 9. "You going somewhere?" "Yes." "Need help?" "No." He hesitated. "We should talk about last night." "Maybe later," I said flatly. "I have an appointment." He didn't ask where. He never did. That was the problem. I drove downtown to the law office of Jenna Morales, a woman Lou had recommended, and who, according to her business card, specialized in asset protection and elder justice. That last part stung a little, but I was old enough to know when a title was more about dignity than age. Jenna was young, maybe mid-30s, but sharp-eyed and warm. She welcomed me in with a firm handshake and a voice that said she was used to hearing people's worst days. I laid out everything. The debt, the co-signed loans, the leases, the damage to my credit, the physical assault, the silence that followed. She listened without interrupting, just nodded, made notes, asked for copies. When I finished, she said, "You're not the first woman to sit across from me with this story, but you're one of the few who documented it so well." I blinked. "You mean, this happens often?" "More than you think. Especially to women who remarry later in life. Financial abuse isn't loud. It's not bruises or screaming matches. It's quiet erosion. But it's still abuse." The word sat heavy between us. Abuse. I had never allowed myself to call it that. She continued, "You have options. You can remove your name from every shared account. You can file a police report for the assault. You can even revoke any informal agreements made without proper documentation." I nodded slowly. "I don't want to punish anyone. I just want to be free." She smiled, not unkindly. Sometimes freedom is the punishment. By noon, I had signed a power of attorney that would allow Jenna to start contacting institutions on my behalf. We drafted letters to cancel the phone plan, transfer the car lease, freeze the joint credit cards. Every action had a paper trail. Every move was legal, quiet, and irrevocable. I felt no guilt. Not even when I signed the final authorization and sealed the envelope addressed to Braden. Back home, the house was quiet. Martin was in the garage. I sat at the dining table, the same one where Braden had burned my skin with his anger, and I set the envelope in the center. I knew what it looked like, just a piece of paper. But to me, it was a monument, to my endurance, to my clarity, to the woman I had buried under years of soft-spoken tolerance. That night, Martin found the envelope. He didn't ask what it was for. He didn't ask who it was for. He just looked at me and said, "I hope this doesn't mean you're leaving." It brazen-steadied viling. I met his gaze and said, "It means I've already left. You just didn't notice." Braden didn't come home that night. I knew because his shoes were still by the door, his jacket still slung over the back of the chair, and his bedroom light never clicked on. The house settled into its usual nighttime sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock above the sink, but something about the quiet felt different, expectant, like the pause before a storm. Martin went to bed early, or at least he went to the bedroom. I heard the television murmur through the wall long after the lights were out. I stayed in the living room, sitting upright on the edge of the couch, my burned arm wrapped loosely in gauze. The skin throbbed in dull waves, but it kept me grounded. Every pulse reminded me I was still here, still awake, still aware. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You really did it." I didn't reply. A minute later, another message came through. "You think you're clever? You think you can just cut me off and walk away like nothing happened?" I set the phone face down on the coffee table. My hands were steady. That surprised me. A year ago, even a sharp tone from Braden would have sent me spiraling into explanations and apologies. Tonight, his words slid past me like rain against glass. At 12:17 a.m., the front door flew open. Braden staggered in, reeking of alcohol and fury. His eyes landed on me immediately, sitting there in the dim light like I'd been waiting for him. In a way, I had. "You think you won?" he slurred. "You think you're some kind of hero now?" I didn't answer. He laughed, sharp and bitter. "You always do this. You act calm like you're above it, like you're better than everyone else." I stood slowly, keeping distance between us. "You're drunk, Braden. Go to bed." He stepped closer. Too close. "You don't get to tell me what to do," he snapped. "This is my house." I looked around. The framed photos, the furniture I'd helped choose, the bills I'd paid. "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." His jaw tightened. "Dad!" Martin appeared in the hallway, bleary-eyed and confused. "What's going on?" "She's trying to kick me out," Braden shouted. "She's trying to ruin my life." Martin looked at me, then at my arm, still bandaged. For a moment, something like shame flickered across his face. "Braden," he said carefully, "it's late. We'll talk in the morning." "No," Braden barked. "We talk now." She crossed a line. I met Martin's eyes. He burned me. He threw a plate at me, and you told him to calm down. Silence dropped like a weight. Martin opened his mouth, then closed it. Again. That was my answer. "I'm not kicking you out," I said to Braden. "I'm just not carrying you anymore." "You think I need you," he sneered. "I've got friends. I've got options." "I hope so," I said. And I meant it. He stormed off down the hall, slamming his bedroom door so hard the walls rattled. Martin stood there, staring at the floor like it held all the answers he refused to give. "You didn't have to do it like this," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. "I did." I went to the bedroom and locked the door. Sleep came in fragments, dreams full of doors closing, keys turning, voices calling my name from rooms I no longer entered. When morning finally arrived, it came gray and cold, the sky heavy with winter clouds. I was already dressed when Martin knocked softly. "Braden's gone," he said through the door. I opened it. "Gone where?" He shrugged. "A friend's place, I guess. He took the car." I nodded. "He has until the end of the billing cycle before the insurance lapses. He knows that." Martin flinched. "Evelyn, he's my son." "And I was your wife." I replied. Last night, I didn't feel like either. End quote. That afternoon, the calls began. First from the phone company, confirming the cancellation. Then the insurance office, polite but firm. Then the leasing agency. Each conversation was calm, procedural, almost boring. I welcomed that. Drama had taken enough from me. At 3 o'clock, Braden called. You really think paperwork makes you powerful? He demanded. You're nothing without Dad. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I was something before either of you, I said, and I'll be something after. He hung up. By evening, Martin sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. I don't recognize my family anymore, he said. I poured myself a glass of water. Neither do I. Later that night, I stood in the bathroom, unwrapping the gauze from my arm. The burn was angry and red, but it was healing. Slowly, honestly, just like me. I realized then that this wasn't about Braden alone, or even Martin. It was about the years I had spent shrinking myself so others wouldn't feel threatened by my strength. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. The next day, I went to the pharmacy to pick up more burn cream and gauze. I didn't wear long sleeves to hide the injury, not anymore. The clerk behind the counter, a young woman with blue eyeliner and a nose ring, winced when she rang me up. That looks painful, she said. It was, I replied. But it's healing. She didn't ask more. People rarely do when the hurt isn't visible on a police report. Back in the car, I sat for a moment and looked at my hands. Strong, veined, scarred from a life of cooking, cleaning, typing, lifting, giving. I had spent most of my adulthood using them to take care of others. And now, I was learning how to use them to take care of myself. The mail was waiting on the porch when I returned home. Among the envelopes was a small note with Braden's handwriting. You win. Congrats. Hope it's worth it. No apology. No responsibility. Just bitterness wrapped in sarcasm. I tossed it in the trash without reading it again. Martin was in the living room, watching the news with the volume turned low. He barely looked up as I came in. How's the arm? He asked. Better, I replied, setting down the pharmacy bag. We sat in silence for a few minutes, not the comfortable kind that lovers share, but the heavy kind, full of things that should have been said years ago. I called Braden this morning, he said finally. Of course you did. He's staying with Kyle. He said he's fine. Good. Martin rubbed the bridge of his nose. I don't know what you expect me to do, Evelyn. He's my son. And I'm your wife. Or was. His eyes snapped up. Don't say that. I'm saying it because it's true. I've spent 8 years playing second to a ghost and a grown man who refuses to grow up. And you let it happen. I didn't know. Yes, you did, I interrupted. You just didn't want to face it. You didn't want to make waves, so you let me drown instead. He looked like he'd been slapped. I can't fix this overnight, he said quietly. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking if you even want to. He didn't answer. That night, I packed a bag. Just one. I didn't take everything. Just what I needed for a few nights. Clothes, medication, the envelope with my documents, and my copy of the house key, which I left on the kitchen counter. I didn't leave a note. I went to stay at a small Airbnb on the edge of town, nothing fancy. A cottage behind a retired couple's home. It had a kitchenette, a small fireplace, and a screened-in porch with a rocking chair that creaked with every breeze. It reminded me of the summers I used to spend at my grandmother's house in Mississippi, before everything became about bills, marriage, and the slow erosion of self. The next morning, I woke up to birdsong instead of Braden's shouting. I made tea instead of coffee. I read a book instead of sorting bills. And I didn't miss them. I didn't miss the house. I didn't miss Martin's hollow silence. I certainly didn't miss the feeling of being constantly braced for impact. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a calm, clipped voice introduced herself as Vanessa Thomas, a representative from the leasing office where Braden's car had been registered. Hi, Miss Carter, she said. We're calling to confirm that the termination request for the lease has been processed. However, the vehicle has not been returned, and we've had no contact with the secondary driver. Braden Carter, I confirmed. Yes, that's correct. Unfortunately, since the lease was co-signed, the responsibility still technically falls under your name until the car is recovered or payment is remitted. I took a deep breath. I'll speak with my attorney and follow up. Of course. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. I thanked her and hung up. So, he was still driving the car, still pretending nothing had changed. I called Jenna, and within the hour, she filed a legal notice on my behalf, revoking my liability for the lease and requesting repossession of the vehicle. By that evening, a tow truck had picked it up. Braden called, furious. He left 4 voicemails, each more unhinged than the last. You crazy witch, you can't take my car. I need that to get to interviews. You ruined my life. You think you're so righteous, guess what? No one believes you. You're pathetic. A bitter old woman. No wonder Mom hated you. I swear to God, I'll make you pay for this. I didn't answer any of them. I saved them all. The last one. The threat, I forwarded to Jenna. She called me back within 10 minutes. This is now a police matter, she said. Do you want to press charges? I paused, looking out the window of the little cottage, the wind stirring the trees. Not yet, I said, but I want it documented. I want a record of everything. Smart, she replied. If he contacts you again, let me know. I hung up and let the silence settle around me. This wasn't over, but I wasn't afraid anymore. The day after Braden's threatening voicemail, I walked into the police station with a printed transcript of the message and a copy of my attorney's letter. The young officer at the front desk, a man who looked no older than my grandson, read the paper, then looked up at me with something between sympathy and surprise. He actually said this to you? He asked. He did. It's on my voicemail. You can listen if you like. He waved his hand. No need. This is more than enough for a report. We'll open a file. He took down my information, printed a copy for his supervisor, and asked if I wanted to speak to someone in the department's family violence unit. The words made me stiffen, not because I didn't believe them, but because hearing them spoken aloud forced me to admit the reality I'd been navigating for years. This wasn't just family tension. This was abuse, and it had been normalized so long I'd started to believe enduring it was my role. But that morning, in the white-tiled quiet of that small-town station, I said yes. Yes to the file. Yes to the documentation. Yes to no longer carrying someone else's damage like it was mine. By noon, I was back in the cottage, sitting in the sunroom with a notebook in my lap. The rocking chair creaked under me as I jotted down thoughts fragmented, emotional, but true. What have I lost? Time, self-worth, trust. What have I gained? Clarity, strength, peace. I hadn't written anything for years, not since before I met Martin. I used to journal daily when I was younger, before kids, before bills, before I was anyone's missus. Back then, I filled entire notebooks with poetry, letters never sent, reflections on how it felt to move through the world as a woman in her own skin. Now, I was rediscovering that voice again. That night, I got a call from Martin. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to hear him out. Evelyn, he began, I went by the house. Yours. Ours. It feels wrong without you. Because you're finally hearing the silence I lived with? He sighed. I miss you. I waited. I know I've been a coward. I didn't protect you. I let Braden take too much. I let you take too little. Still, I said nothing. I can't fix what's already broken, he said, but I'm willing to try, if you'll let me. Emphasis. Trying looks like what, Martin? Telling your son no? Standing up for your wife instead of sitting down with your guilt? He was quiet. I'm seeing a counselor, he said finally. A real one. Not just for us, for me. I need to understand why I've stayed silent so long. That surprised me. I'm not asking to come home, he added. Not yet. I want to be the man you thought you were marrying, and I know that starts with being the father I should have been too. I doed. For the first time in months, I heard something real in his voice. Not pity, not defensiveness, just humility. That's a good start, I said softly, but I need time. Take all the time you need. After we hung up, I sat still for a long while. No tears, no racing thoughts, just the quiet knowledge that something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, Martin wasn't hiding behind Braden, and I wasn't hiding behind anyone. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Judith, Martin's sister. She and I had never been particularly close, but we'd shared cordial visits and polite conversations over the years. I expected her to take Braden's side, or at the very least Martin's, but her note surprised me. Evelyn, I saw what happened at that dinner. I didn't speak up then, and I regret it. I've seen Braden treat you like a servant for years, and I chose politeness over justice. That's on me. I want you to know I admire what you did. It took courage. I hope you find peace, and if you ever want someone to talk to or play Scrabble with, I'm here. With respect, Judith. I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly, placed it on the table beside my journal, and let myself smile. Sometimes, when one person breaks the silence, it gives others permission to do the same. That evening, I lit a candle. Not for ceremony, not for grief, just to mark a new kind of stillness, one born not from fear, but from presence. Braden hadn't called since the police notice. Martin hadn't pushed. The cottage, warm and simple, began to feel like a beginning, not an escape. And I realized that healing doesn't come in loud declarations or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it comes in soft moments, in a phone call, a letter, a quiet refusal to disappear. 1 week into my stay at the cottage, I began to notice a new rhythm forming, one shaped by simplicity, choice, and the quiet luxury of my own space. I would rise early, make tea, and sit by the window where sunlight poured across the wooden floor like honey. I'd write in my journal, take slow walks along the gravel road that curved behind the trees, and occasionally stop to chat with Helen and Roy, the elderly couple who owned the property. They never asked too many questions. Maybe they didn't have to. Helen would sometimes bring over a small basket, fresh eggs, blueberry muffins, a crocheted potholder, and always say the same thing as she handed it to me. Just in case you need a little comfort today. Some days I did. Others, I didn't. But every time, I thanked her like it was the first. Then, one afternoon, I received a message that changed everything. It was from Lou. "Call me. I think something's going down with Braden you should know about." My stomach tightened. I hadn't heard Braden's name in days, and the silence had been a gift I didn't dare return. Still, I called Lou back. He answered on the first ring. "You sitting down?" he asked. "I'm alone in a rocking chair. That count?" He chuckled, but the humor was thin. "I've got a friend in collections, don't ask who, just know she's good. She said Braden's name popped up, flagged this morning. He applied for a loan using some of your past documentation. Stuff you've already removed yourself from. But the paperwork, Evelyn, he used an old joint file." I gripped the phone tighter. "Are you saying he forged my information?" "Not exactly forged, he used outdated forms that made it look like you were still co-signing. It's borderline, but it's dirty." I closed my eyes. "He's desperate." "Yeah," Lou said. "Desperate men are dangerous men. I've already cut financial ties," I told him. "I have a lawyer. We've revoked everything legal." Lou paused. "That may not be enough." IMS. The next morning, Jenna and I filed a formal cease and desist. We requested a fraud investigation through the bank, and I submitted sworn statements that clarified the full scope of my prior disassociation with Braden's finances. But what hurt more than the paperwork, more than the fear that my credit could take another hit, was the realization that he hadn't just failed to change. He'd doubled down. He was still trying to climb out of his mess using me as the ladder. That night, as I sat by the fireplace, watching the flames flicker and crackle, I let the anger come. I didn't run from it. I didn't silence it. I let it bloom inside me like wildfire. Because sometimes, what keeps women trapped isn't just fear or love, it's the denial of their own fury. And I was done denying mine. I called Martin. He answered, sounding tired. "I heard," he said before I could even speak. "So he told you. He came by this morning swearing it was a misunderstanding. He said you were exaggerating, that the documents were just old paperwork." "Did you believe him?" I asked. There was a long pause. "No," he said finally. "Not this time." That answer caught me off guard. I told him to stay away from me, from the house, from you. I told him I'm meeting with a counselor next week, and I meant it. I exhaled slowly. "That's good, Martin. That's a start." "I'm sorry it took me this long," he said. "I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet. But silence isn't peace, is it?" "No," I said. "It's just the absence of justice." The line went quiet. Not heavy, not bitter, just still. Then he said, I'd like to come see you, if you'll let me, just to talk. No pressure. Let me think about it. He understood. 2 days later, I met with Jenna again. We walked through every detail of Braden's most recent stunt. She was confident that he wouldn't get far, that any loan officer worth their salt would flag the inconsistencies, but she reminded me that documentation wasn't just for legal protection. It's your armor, she said. The truth makes people uncomfortable, but the truth also makes you unbreakable. That night, I received a second letter. Not from Judith. Not from Martin. It was from Braden. The envelope was crumpled, the handwriting barely legible. Evelyn, you win. Happy now? Dad doesn't even talk to me anymore. Kyle kicked me out. I'm couch surfing. You ruined my life. You were supposed to be the stable one. You were supposed to be the adult. Now look at me. You think you're better than me? You're not. You're just old. You're just lonely. Enjoy your little cabin. Hope you choke on your self-righteousness. Braden. There was no apology. No remorse. Just poison. I didn't cry. I didn't tear it up. I placed it neatly into my file of evidence. Because even when people try to bury you under guilt, the record will tell the real story. And mine was finally starting to take shape. The first thing I noticed when I opened the cottage door that morning was the quiet. Not the peaceful kind I had grown used to over the last few weeks, but the kind of silence that follows after something has shifted. The air was thicker, still, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. I went through my morning routine, tea, toast, a short walk to clear my head, but the letter from Braden still gnawed at the edge of my thoughts. Not because of what it said, but because of what it confirmed. He wasn't finished, and I had to be ready. Later that afternoon, Helen knocked gently at the back screen door, a warm pie in her hands and concern in her eyes. You all right, honey? She asked. You've looked far away lately. I smiled, grateful for her kindness. Just some old ghosts kicking up dust. She set the pie on the table and patted my shoulder. Ghosts are only dangerous if you let them stay. Her words settled deep. That night, I received another call. This time, from Detective Riley, the officer assigned to the report Jenna had filed regarding Braden's attempted use of my information. Mrs. Carter, he began, we've been reviewing the voicemail, the submitted letters, and the statements. Based on what we've seen, you've been systematically financially exploited. This is more than a civil matter. We're preparing to open a criminal investigation. I didn't speak for a moment. Hearing it out loud from someone with a badge felt surreal. I'd lived under that roof for 8 years, endured every slow, grinding erosion of self-worth, and now the world was finally calling it what it was: exploitation. You should also know, he added, Braden was recently evicted from a residence for disorderly conduct. The property owner filed a complaint. That complaint is now part of the record. I thanked him, hung up, sat still, and cried. Not from fear, not even sadness. Relief. It was happening. The truth was surfacing, slowly, publicly. I wrote in my journal that night, every lie Braden told about me is now a line in a report with his name on it instead. 2 days later, Martin arrived at the cottage. He wore a navy jacket I hadn't seen in years and held a bouquet of sunflowers, the kind I used to grow before our backyard became cluttered with Braden's junk. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood on the porch and said, "May I sit with you for a while?" I nodded, stepping aside. We sat in the wicker chairs, facing the yard. He passed me the flowers without a word, and for a few minutes we just listened to the wind rustle through the leaves. I read the report, he said quietly. I looked at him. He wasn't crying, but the corners of his eyes were red. I saw the things you tried to shield me from, things I refused to see. He cleared his throat. I was afraid, he said. Afraid that standing up to Braden would mean losing the last piece of his mother I had left. I thought letting him lean on me was love, but it was weakness. It was denial, I corrected, and it cost me everything. He nodded. I know, and I'm sorry. I have an actor. Silence again. Then he added, I've started writing too, in a journal, trying to untangle all the ways I let silence speak for me. That surprised me, and touched me more than I expected. What do you want, Martin? I asked gently. He looked up, eyes steady. I want to earn back the version of you who used to smile at me. I want to be a man who protects, not one who watches from the sidelines. And I want you to feel safe again. whether that's with me or far away from me." End quote. It was the first time in months he didn't ask for forgiveness. He offered accountability instead. I reached for his hand. We sat like that for a while, not as husband and wife, but as two people finally speaking the same language. After he left, I placed the sunflowers in a mason jar, set them on the windowsill, and wrote a letter. To myself. You did not imagine it. You did not overreact. You survived it. I spent the next morning in the garden behind the cottage, trimming back the overgrown basil and deadheading Helen's roses. The earth felt good beneath my nails, solid, unmoving, honest. Dirt doesn't lie. It doesn't pretend. It shows you exactly what it is and what it needs. There's something sacred in that simplicity. When I was younger, I used to believe healing was passive, that if you just waited long enough, time would patch you up. But real healing, I'd learned, was work. It required action, presence, the willingness to get your hands dirty, sometimes literally. Later that afternoon, a certified letter arrived for me. It was from Braden's employer, his former employer. He had apparently attempted to list me as a financial reference for a second time, despite my attorney's legal notice. When they discovered the situation, they not only rejected the application, but terminated his position for falsifying documentation. Inside the envelope was a brief note. As a courtesy, we are informing you that Mr. Braden Carter is no longer affiliated with our company. We regret the circumstances that led to this and respect your legal right to pursue further action. That night, Jenna and I reviewed our options. With the mounting evidence, threats, exploitation, attempted fraud, we had grounds to file for a protective order. But something inside me hesitated. "Do you want the court to bar him from contact permanently?" she asked. I thought about it. "I don't know," I admitted. "What I want more than anything is for him to disappear from my mind." Jenna nodded. "That's not something the courts can guarantee, but I can promise you this. Once your power is claimed, they can't steal it again. Not without a fight." That settled it. We filed. That weekend, I visited my sister in Asheville, Lena, my younger by 3 years, louder by nature baby sister. She had always been the firecracker, the one who spoke her mind and never let anyone walk over her. We hadn't talked much over the past few years, not because of a falling out, just life, marriage, distance, shame. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with a small overnight bag and tired eyes, she didn't say anything. She just pulled me in for the kind of hug I didn't know I still needed. We sat on her porch swing that night, drinking sweet tea and watching the sun set behind the mountains. "You look older," she said, not unkindly. "I feel older." She tapped her foot against the wood. "You also look stronger." I told her everything. Not all at once. Not with dramatic flair, just the slow unspooling of a woman who had been holding in stories for too long. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp or shake her head or say, "I told you so." She just listened. "And when I was done," she said, "you know what's wild? You always seemed like the strong one to me." That brought tears. Not because it was untrue, but because I had forgotten it could be. "You ever gonna go back to Martin?" she asked. "I don't know." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you want to?" I thought about it honestly. I want him to grow. I want him to stand without leaning on me. I want him to stop being a father who needs permission to do the right thing. And if he does, then we'll see. Before I left, Lena handed me a photograph, an old one, faded and bent at the corners. It was of me in college, standing on a dock in denim cutoffs and a white tank top, laughing with my head thrown back and my hands on my hips. "You forgot her," she said. I did. Well, she's still in there, waiting. I tucked the photo into my journal and drove home with the windows down. The cottage felt different now, not just safe, but mine. I unpacked slowly, placing the photograph on the bedside table next to the sunflowers, now drying in the mason jar. That evening, I wrote a list. Things I am reclaiming. My name, my finances, my time, my space, my voice, my joy, and at the bottom, I added, my peace. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The day the protective order was approved, I received the official notice in a plain white envelope with the court's seal stamped in blue ink. It felt anticlimactic, almost sterile, so different from the weight of what it meant. I held the paper in my hands for several long minutes, Rereading the language. The respondent is to cease all direct or indirect contact with the petitioner. Any violation of this order may result in criminal prosecution. No room for confusion. No room for apology. Just legal clarity, a line drawn between what was tolerated and what would never be tolerated again. Later that evening, as I sat on the screened porch with a warm blanket across my legs, Martin called. He didn't mention the order. He didn't have to. I heard from Judith, he said instead. She told me she sent you a letter. She did, I replied. It meant a lot. He paused. She said she wants to host a family gathering next month, a chance to rebuild some bridges. I told her I wasn't sure if you'd want to come. I'm not sure either. I understand, he said. And for once, I believed him. Then he added, I've been thinking a lot about who I was before I met you, and who I became after. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being a husband and started being a referee. It's stay. I sighed quietly. It's hard to love someone when you're constantly bracing for the next blow. I know that now. There was another pause. Softer this time. I miss you, Evelyn. I miss who we were supposed to be, I said gently. But I don't know if we can find that again. I'm willing to try, if you are. I'm not ready, I said, but I'm willing to keep talking. And that, for now, was enough. Over the next week, I returned to some of the routines I used to love. I baked again small loaves of banana bread and honey scones, just enough to share with Helen and Roy next door. I joined a local book club that met every Tuesday at the library, a group of women my age who spoke with fire and laughed from their bellies. I'd forgotten how good it felt to be around women who didn't require me to shrink. One afternoon, after the meeting, a woman named Marcia approached me. You're the one with the cottage behind Helen's, right? That's me. It's really managed, it's really coded. I heard what happened with your stepson, she said, not unkindly. I just want you to know, there are more of us than you think. More of us? She nodded. Women who kept the peace so long, we forgot how to hear ourselves think. You're not alone, honey. You're just finally loud enough to be heard. I thanked her. And I meant it. That night, I found myself scrolling through an old photo album I hadn't touched in years. Pictures of me and Martin on our honeymoon. Braden as a sullen teenager. Holidays, birthdays, the fake smiles that look real until you remember what was happening behind them. But in between the posed pictures, I found the ones I forgot existed. Me teaching kids how to bake in the church kitchen, holding hands with my late mother at the county fair, dancing barefoot at a family barbecue. Evidence of the life I had before I allowed someone else's chaos to consume mine. And I realized, healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away too easily. The next morning, I sat down at the small kitchen table with my journal open and a pen in hand. I began to write the kind of letter I never thought I'd send. Not to Braden, not to Martin, to myself. Dear Evelyn, you waited too long to believe in your own pain, but now that you do, you're unstoppable. You lost time. You lost years, but you did not lose yourself. Not forever. You are not defined by what was done to you, but by what you chose to do after. You chose to speak. You chose to leave. You chose to stand. And that is more powerful than any apology you'll never get. Keep going. You are worth the peace you fought for. I signed my name at the bottom, set down the pen, and exhaled. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was the first time in years I felt ready for what came next. The phone rang early the next morning, startling me out of sleep. For a second, I thought it might be Braden. That cold pit of fear still lingered, even after the protective order. But when I looked at the screen, it was Martin. I hesitated, then answered. Evelyn, he said breathless. Braden's been arrested. I sat up straighter. What? Fraud. The bank called the authorities when he tried to open another account under a falsified name. They linked it back to your complaint. The detective called me this morning to confirm. Now in Deltu, I felt a strange mix of emotions, none of them joy. Relief, yes. Closure, maybe. But no celebration, no satisfaction. Only the hollow weight of what could have been avoided if he'd ever been willing to change. Is he still in custody? I asked. For now, Martin said. He's being processed. I'm not going to bail him out. That I hadn't expected. You're not? No, he said softly. I love my son, Evelyn. But loving him doesn't mean enabling him anymore. It means letting him face the consequences. I didn't respond right away. I wanted you to hear it from me, he added. Not from the papers. Thank you. After the call, I made tea and stepped outside to sit on the porch, letting the cold air hit my skin. It was sharp, fresh, bracing, like a new beginning. Later that day, I met with Jenna to confirm the legal implications. The protective order had worked. The documentation had worked. The truth, so often doubted, had held up in a court of law. You were smart to file everything, she said. Women often second-guess themselves. You didn't. I used to, I admitted. But not anymore. Want to press additional charges? She asked. I considered it. No, I said finally. I don't want revenge. I want distance. I want peace. And I had it now. The news of Braden's arrest traveled quickly. The book club women knew by that same evening. Marcia hugged me tightly before the meeting. You stood up to the fire, and you came out glowing, she whispered. I laughed. I feel more like smoke and ashes. Even ashes have stories to tell. That night, I walked alone through the town square, decorated with early winter lights and garlands. Couples wandered past holding hands, children played with paper snowflakes, and somewhere in the distance, a choir was rehearsing for the holidays. I hadn't felt joy like that in a long time, not because my life had been empty, but because it had been muted. I'd lived in grayscale for years. Now, things had color again. Sound, texture. When I returned to the cottage, I found a letter slipped under the door. No envelope. Just a single piece of paper. Evelyn, I heard what happened. I know I messed up worse than I can even understand. I know you probably never want to see me again. But I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I finally see how much I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve your time. I just wanted you to know that if I ever grow up into the man I should have been, it will be because you taught me how by walking away. Braden. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the letter. It wasn't enough to undo the years, but it was more than I ever thought he'd give. I folded the letter and placed it beside the one I'd written to myself. Both were truths, written from different corners of the storm. That night, I lit a single candle. Not for Braden. Not for Martin. For me. Because survival wasn't the whole story. Recovery was. Winter settled over the town like a quiet promise. The trees stood bare against a slate-colored sky, and frost curled across the windows of the cottage in delicate, lace-like patterns. I found myself drawn to the silence these days, not the kind forced by fear or tension, but the kind that offered rest, reflection. One morning, I awoke before sunrise. I lit the fireplace and wrapped myself in the old quilt my mother gave me before she passed. It smelled faintly of lavender and cedar, and when I closed my eyes, I could almost hear her humming in the kitchen. There were still moments, even now, when guilt tried to creep in. Not about Braden, not even about Martin, about myself. About the years I spent minimizing, deflecting, telling myself things weren't that bad. But I no longer let guilt take root. I let it pass like wind through bare branches. That afternoon, I returned a call I'd been avoiding from my niece, Kendra. She was 32, opinionated, bright, a newly single mother raising a boy who reminded me far too much of Braden at that age, only gentler, more sensitive. I saw the article, she said right away. I had no idea, Aunt Evelyn. End quote. This 5 presidents, I sighed. Not many people did. Well, I just want you to know. I'm proud of you. I mean that. I stayed in a mess far too long myself, thinking I owed someone grace they never earned. You don't owe anyone the right to hurt you, I said gently. She paused. I'm learning that. Slowly. We talked for nearly an hour. About her son, about her job, about the ache of learning to start over when the world expects you to stay put. And as we spoke, I realized something unexpected. This wasn't just about my healing anymore. It was about legacy. Not the kind built from money or reputation, but from truth, from voice. Later that week, Martin called again. This time, he didn't ask how I was. He asked if I'd join him at therapy. I don't expect you to speak, he said. Just be there. If that's something you can give. I thought about it for a long time. Then, I said yes. The office was in a converted Victorian home on the east side of town. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Teresa Myers, greeted us both with warmth but no judgment. She didn't lean into awkward silences. She didn't rush. Martin spoke first. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He simply said, "I chose comfort over truth for a long time, and it cost the person I loved most everything she had to give." Dr. Myers looked at me. "Would you like to respond?" I took a breath. "I'm not here to fix anything," I said. "I'm here to witness whether something new can grow." Martin nodded, quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we were standing on equal ground. When the session ended, we stepped outside into the crisp air. Snow flurries drifted down around us, catching on our coats and eyelashes. Martin turned to me. "I know this doesn't erase anything." "No, it doesn't, but I'm willing to do the work." "I know. We didn't make plans. We didn't set expectations. But something had shifted." Back at the cottage, I found a package on the porch. No return address. Inside, a book, one I had lent to Braden years ago and never seen again. Tucked between the pages was a note. "You said once that people show who they are when no one's watching. This is me trying to show up, even if it's too late. Thank you for not becoming like me. I'm trying not to be me either." AB2. I closed the book and placed it gently on the shelf. I didn't know what the future held for Braden. I didn't know what trying meant to him, but I knew what it meant to me. Trying wasn't about perfection. It was about the choice to show up again. For yourself. For the people you love. For the life you nearly gave away. That night, I lit 2 candles. One for the girl I used to be, and one for the woman who chose to come home to herself. The week before Christmas, the cottage glowed with quiet warmth. I had decorated it modestly, white lights along the mantel, a small evergreen in the corner with handmade ornaments, a tin of molasses cookies on the kitchen counter. The kind of holiday I hadn't had in years. Not because I couldn't decorate before, but because joy had always felt performative, forced. When your home is a place of eggshells and cold shoulders, stringing up garland feels like dressing a wound in glitter. But this year, it was different. This year, I wasn't decorating to impress. I was creating a space where I felt whole. Helen stopped by with a holiday wreath and a jar of her cranberry preserves. "The cottage looks like it's smiling," she said with a wink. "It finally feels like a home," I replied. That afternoon, I sat by the window, sipping spiced tea, watching a pair of cardinals flutter in the snow-dusted branches. Peace isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's as small as a bird landing just outside your grief and reminding you the world still moves forward. Then came a knock at the door. I opened it to find Martin, bundled in a navy coat, holding a plain cardboard box. "I'm not here to stay," he said quickly. "I just wanted to bring you something." He stepped inside, setting the box on the table, then carefully pulled out a quilt familiar, faded, and patched in places. My grandmother's quilt. The one I thought was lost years ago in one of Braden's so-called spring cleanings. "I found it in the attic," Martin said. "Braden must have stuffed it in a bin of old linens. I thought you might want it back." I ran my fingers across the fabric, the small hand-stitched initials in the corner. E, M, C. My mother had sewn it for me when I turned 18. It was the one thing that came with me to every apartment, every house, every turning point of my life. Tears prickled at the edge of my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. Martin didn't try to hug me, didn't push. He simply nodded and walked back into the cold. That night, I wrapped myself in the quilt and fell asleep with a soft ache in my chest, not sadness. Exactly, more like the weight of something returning that I thought was gone forever. The next morning, I received a message from Judith. "The family dinner is still on. No pressure, but I hope you'll come. Braden won't be there." I stared at the screen for a long moment. I hadn't seen most of the family since the night everything unraveled. What would they say? Would they pity me? Judge me? But then I remembered what Jenna told me weeks ago. The only shame worth carrying is the kind that teaches you who you're not. I wasn't a woman who hid anymore. I replied, "I'll come." The dinner was held at Judith's house, a 2-story colonial nestled in a row of snow-covered pines. The porch lights twinkled, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey met me at the door. Judith greeted me with a long, firm hug. "I'm glad you're here," she said. Inside, the house was filled with quiet conversation and clinking glasses. Cousins, nieces, nephews, some of whom avoided eye contact, others who smiled too broadly, but no one said anything cruel. No one asked questions I wasn't ready to answer, until Kyle approached me, Braden's younger half-brother. He cleared his throat, eyes cast down. I just want to say, I was wrong. I saw things, heard things, and I didn't say anything. I studied him. His shame was real, but so was his youth. I appreciate you telling me, I said. It's never too late to speak the truth. I'm trying, he said, to be better than what we were taught. I offered him a small smile. That's all any of us can do. By the end of the evening, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Acknowledged. Not just tolerated or endured, but seen. Not for the role I once played, but for the woman I'd become since stepping away. That night, back in the cottage, I lit the fireplace and sat in silence, the quilt wrapped around my shoulders, and I realized that closure doesn't come all at once. It comes in quiet moments, in returned quilts and overdue apologies, in soft spaces where your name is finally spoken with respect. I wrote in my journal, "This is not the ending I imagined, but it's the one I earned, and that makes all the difference." New Year's Eve came quietly. No champagne, no countdown, just a candle, a cup of ginger tea, and the ticking of the old wall clock in the cottage kitchen. I hadn't made resolutions in years. For a long time, I'd convinced myself I didn't have the right to ask for more. That hope belonged to people who hadn't spent a decade rationing their worth. But this year, I did something different. I made a list not of goals or promises, but of refusals. This year, I refuse to. Asterisk, shrink to make others comfortable. Asterisk, apologize for choosing peace. Asterisk, accept silence where there should be love. Asterisk, justify my own pain to people unwilling to believe it. I folded the paper and tucked it into my journal. This wasn't just about letting go of a man, or a marriage, or a past. It was about releasing the story I had told myself about who I had to be. The next morning, the first sunrise of the year spilled over the treetops in golden streaks. I walked out to the back porch in my robe and slippers, letting the cold bite my skin and the light warm my face. I was still here, still standing, still becoming. Later that day, I received a call from Jenna. She had just returned from holiday break and wanted to give me an update. Braden had officially been charged with 2 counts of attempted fraud and 1 count of financial impersonation. Because of my reports and the bank's records, the case was airtight. "He's going to have to stand before a judge," she said. "There's a pretrial hearing in 2 weeks. You don't have to attend, but you have the right to make a statement if you want." I wasn't sure. Did I want to speak? What would I say? That he broke something I spent years building? That he mistook kindness for weakness? That he nearly made me forget who I was? That night, I stood in front of the mirror. I looked older, yes, but stronger too. The softness in my face hadn't gone away, it had simply been joined by a steadiness that came from surviving. I imagined what I might say in court. Then I wrote it down. "Your Honor, I am not here to ask for punishment. I am here to tell the truth. The man who sits before you did not use fists. He used control, manipulation, shame. He hollowed out the house I called home until it was nothing but walls and expectations. But I survived. I rebuilt my life, brick by brick, breath by breath, and I came here not for revenge, but to ensure no one else has to walk through the same fire without a name to hold on to. I was that woman once. I'm not anymore." I printed the statement and placed it in an envelope marked "For Court." Whether I used it or not, it was mine, my voice, my power. The following weekend, Helen invited me to dinner. She and Roy had become my quiet sanctuary neighbors who asked nothing in return but presence. Over warm soup and cornbread, she leaned forward and said, "You know what I see when I look at you now, Evelyn?" "What's that?" "Someone who stopped waiting to be rescued." I smiled. "That's because I finally realized I was the one holding the key. And I had been, all along." That night, I dreamed I was walking barefoot through a forest, my hands empty, my heart light. In the distance, I saw a version of myself years younger, still hopeful, still whole. She looked up and smiled as if to say, "Welcome back." I woke up with tears in my eyes and peace in my chest. The past could no longer hold me. The future no longer frightened me. And the present was mine. 2 days before the pretrial hearing, a light snow began to fall, soft and soundless, like a gentle hush laid over the world. I stood at the cottage window with a mug of coffee, watching the flakes drift past the glass. It felt like nature's way of offering me a blank page. I had decided to attend the hearing. Not for Braden. Not even for Martin. For myself. I want to read the statement, I told Jenna over the phone. I want to stand in that room and say out loud what he did. Not to hurt him. Just so it exists somewhere outside of me. She paused, then said, "That's the most powerful reason there is." The courthouse was a modest brick building downtown, nothing like the cold, cavernous spaces I'd seen on television. It felt more like a school or a library. Still, my heart thudded like a drum as I walked through the security line, the folded paper in my purse suddenly feeling 1,000 pounds. Martin met me there. He didn't speak at first. Just stood beside me in the lobby, his hands in his coat pockets, his eyes heavy with regret. I told him I wouldn't testify on his behalf, he finally said. I nodded. That was the right thing? I know, he replied quietly, but it still hurts. Sometimes doing the right thing does hurt. When Braden was brought into the courtroom, I didn't flinch. His face was thinner, his posture less cocky. For the first time, he looked small. Not vulnerable, just diminished, the way people look when the world stops protecting their worst behaviors. He didn't meet my eyes. The judge reviewed the charges, and then the clerk asked if I wanted to give a statement. I stepped forward. The room was quiet. Too quiet. I could hear the sound of my own breath, my boots on the tile floor, the subtle creak of the wooden bench behind me. Then I read, word for word, slowly, deliberately. Every line of truth I had written poured into the air like water finding its path. I didn't tremble. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. My voice was steady. My presence, undeniable. When I finished, the judge nodded and thanked me. No theatrics, no applause. Just acknowledgement. That was all I needed. Outside the courthouse, Martin walked me to my car. You were remarkable, he said. I was honest, I replied. That's enough. Stayed. He looked like he wanted to say more. Maybe he did. But he didn't push. Instead, he said, I'll be here, if you ever want to talk again. And he meant it. That night, I returned to the cottage, hung my coat on the peg by the door, and curled up on the couch with the quilt across my legs. The fire crackled gently, casting shadows across the walls. In the silence, I allowed myself to exhale not just from the day, but from the years. I had done what so many women never get to do. I had told my story out loud, and the sky hadn't fallen. The world had, in fact, kept spinning, but I had changed. I had reclaimed the narrative. The next morning, I woke up to a sunrise so golden it looked like it had been painted just for me. I stood in the light, wrapped in the quilt my mother made, and thought, this is what surviving with grace looks like. This is what peace feels like when you've earned it. The weeks after the hearing passed like pages turning in a well-worn book, each day quieter, steadier, more filled with breath. I'd begun to live again, not just function. My mornings started with journaling, followed by long walks along the creek trail near the edge of town, where snowmelt trickled under footbridges and robins sang their thawing songs. Braden's sentencing was scheduled for March. I had chosen not to attend, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed the theater of justice to confirm what I already knew. I had survived him. Instead, I poured my energy into rebuilding. One Friday afternoon, I visited the community center to volunteer at the women's literacy group. It was something Helen had nudged me toward. Just show up. See how it feels, she'd said. The room was filled with women of all ages, some in their 20s, others in their 60s, each one carrying a story. Many had lived in silence for too long, like I had. Some were learning to read after decades of hiding their illiteracy. Others were immigrants navigating a new language, a new life. But they all had one thing in common. They had decided their story wasn't finished yet. Neither was mine. As the weeks went on, I found myself drawn to a woman named Colette. She was in her 50s, soft-spoken, with eyes that always seemed to be watching everything. She rarely spoke during group. But one day, as we packed up the books, she approached me. I heard what you said about shame, she murmured. about how it lives in your throat until you force it to leave. I looked at her gently. It took me years to say anything, but when I finally did, I got my voice back. She hesitated, then said, "He told me I'd never make it without him, that I was too dumb to survive on my own. Is he gone now?" She nodded. "But his voice still lives in my head." I touched her arm. "That voice isn't yours, and it never belonged there." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. "Thank you." After she left, I sat in my car and wept not out of sadness, but because I finally understood something. We don't heal just for ourselves. We heal to pass the torch, to remind others there is light after darkness. That night, Martin called. He had been attending therapy weekly, slowly untangling years of codependence and silence. He never pressured me to talk, but this time, he asked gently if he could visit. "I don't want to talk about the past," he said. "I just want to hear how you're doing now." I agreed. He came the next day with 2 cups of coffee and a new copy of a book we used to read together early in our marriage, the kind of thoughtful gesture he'd forgotten in the years of chaos. We sat on the porch, the winter sun warming our faces. "I've been journaling too," he said. At first it was just a way to unload. But now, I'm starting to hear myself again. The good parts, the quiet parts I buried. I listened, not as his wife, as someone who used to love him deeply, and who now simply wished him peace. "I don't expect us to go back," he said. "But I hope, maybe, one day, we can sit beside each other without the weight of everything we didn't say." "I think we just did that," I replied softly. When he left, I didn't feel torn. I felt proud. Proud of the woman who no longer sought validation from someone else's progress. Proud of the life I was building without waiting for permission. That evening, I lit a small candle and opened a new journal. On the first page, I wrote, "This is the chapter I write not from pain, but from purpose. This is where I begin again." Spring came early that year. The cherry blossoms along Main Street bloomed in bursts of pink and white, and the air was thick with the smell of fresh earth and new beginnings. I found myself smiling more often, not out of habit, but because something inside me had softened. The cottage had become more than just shelter. It was now a sanctuary, a place where my voice echoed freely, where the walls held memories I chose, not ones that haunted me. One afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a letter handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. "Evelyn, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, not even your attention, but I want you to know I've started therapy, real therapy, not just the kind they make you do in jail. I'm not writing to explain myself. I'm writing because every night I remember the look on your face that day in court. Not angry, not spiteful, just done. And that look broke something in me that needed breaking. I don't know who I am without the version of myself that hurt you, but I'm trying to find out. If I ever become someone worth knowing, it'll be because of the way you stood when everything in me wanted you to fall. Thank you for walking away. Beatty." I read the letter twice, then I folded it, placed it in a drawer I rarely opened, and let it go. Because healing didn't mean holding on. It meant knowing I didn't need the last word. I already had the right one. A few days later, the Literacy Center hosted a small celebration for its volunteers. I was given a certificate and a bouquet of yellow daisies. Colette stood beside me, now one of the most active voices in the group. "You were right," she whispered. "Shame does leave. Eventually. It doesn't walk out," I replied. "You have to kick it." She laughed, a rich, full laugh I hadn't heard before. "Well then, here's to both of us kicking it out, one truth at a time." Martin called that evening. "I wanted to let you know," he said. "I've started volunteering with a support group for fathers navigating co-parenting after divorce. It's hard, but it feels important. I'm proud of you," I said simply. "Would you ever consider having dinner sometime? Not as husband and wife, just 2 people who knew each other once and maybe could again." I didn't answer right away, but I didn't say no, because forgiveness isn't always an open door. Sometimes it's a window cracked just enough to let fresh air in. Later that night, I sat on the back porch, watching the stars. They blinked gently in the indigo sky, quiet and steady. And I realized the story wasn't over. Not because I needed more drama, but because I was finally the one holding the pen. I wrote in my journal, "I am not a victim. I am not a survivor. I am a storyteller. And this is mine." The final chapter began not with an ending, but with a question. What do you do when the storm passes? When the noise quiets? When the apology comes too late, and the damage is already done but you're still standing? You live. You live deliberately. 6 months had passed since the hearing. Braden was serving time in a low-security facility. I hadn't heard from him again, not since the letter, and I didn't need to. That chapter had closed, not with slamming doors or courtroom gavel strikes, but with me choosing to walk away and stay away. Martin and I did have dinner. It was quiet, not awkward, not nostalgic, just real. 2 adults sitting across from each other, acknowledging the years they wasted and the strength they each had to rebuild in different directions. "I'm not looking to fix anything," he said gently. "I just want to stop pretending like none of it happened." "I stopped pretending a long time ago," I replied, "but I'm glad you finally joined me." We paid our bill. We said goodbye. And that, too, felt complete. That summer, I expanded my work at the Literacy Center. I started a small weekly workshop for women over 40, Writing Through the Fire, we called it. The premise was simple. Tell your story, in your own words, on your own terms. It wasn't therapy, but sometimes healing hid in the margins of a page. Colette became a co-leader. Watching her take charge, laughing freely, encouraging other women, it was like watching someone bloom in real time. Like watching myself, months ago, in a mirror I didn't know was even there. One day after class, a woman named Lorraine stood beside me as we packed away the chairs. "You always speak like you've already made peace with it all," she said. "But doesn't it still hurt?" "Some days," I admitted. "But now, it doesn't define me." "That's what I want," she whispered. "To be more than what happened to me." "You already are," I told her, because that was the truth. We all were. One Saturday in July, Helen hosted a small gathering at her home, just neighbors, tea, light sandwiches, soft jazz playing through her old stereo. Nothing fancy. Just the kind of afternoon that felt like it belonged in a photo album. At one point, she raised her glass of lemonade and toasted quietly. "To Evelyn, who taught us all that survival isn't enough. You have to own your freedom." The group clinked their glasses. And I smiled, not the strained, careful smile I used to wear, but the kind that starts in your chest and finds its way to your eyes. That night, I returned to the cottage alone. I lit a single candle and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the moonlight shimmering across the yard, and I felt it deep in my bones. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of self. And for the first time in years, I didn't dread tomorrow. I welcomed it. I picked up my pen and wrote the final words in that well-worn journal. I was called a burden, a failure, a woman past her worth. But I endured. And in enduring, I discovered something holy. This life is mine. Unapologetic, unfolding, undeniably mine. And I will never give it away again. The story teaches us that reclaiming one's voice is the first step toward true freedom. It reminds us that strength doesn't always roar sometimes. It whispers through the quiet choices we make to protect our peace. Evelyn's journey shows that healing is not about forgetting the past, but about choosing not to let it define your future. In standing up for herself, she didn't just survive, she transformed. And in doing so, she lit a path for others to follow.